Hello and welcome to Cognitive Dissidence with me, Niall Murphy, coming at you on the 21st, yet the 21st of August 2025. A really Muppety decade. It ain't going to go down in history as being the roaring 20s like the way the 1920s went. No, it's going to, I don't know what they're going to call it. I don't know. I think they're going to have to end up calling it the bloody screaming, shrieking 20s or something, because that's certainly what it appears to be. Right, so what I would like to talk about in today's episode is the sort of slightly bigger historical context, right? For those of you poor bastards still stuck in the UK, in the state that place is in right now, fucking hell, hey? Right, yes, for you poor buggers still stuck there, I really want to look at what I call the longer now perspective. What caused it to end up the way it is at the moment? What were some of the important triggers that made it that way? And according to Rafe Hadel Manku, I don't know if you've heard of him. I think he's a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, and sort of pops up talking head of the alternative media quite a lot. He's also a historian. I think royal historian is what he is. But I've watched quite a few of his videos, and he refers to the UK as being in a post-revolutionary state. Yeah, basically, there was a revolution, an English revolution that happened that no one noticed because no blood was spilt, or at least no more than usual. And it was just very quiet. And it pretty much started with Tony Blair. And well, what happened was, of course, is that before Tony Blair came in, there was a Lord Chancellor, there were law lords, and I think he got rid of them and replaced them with a new Supreme Court. The government, the Chancellor of the Exchequer at number 11 Downing Street, whoever it happened to be, always set the interest rates and had control over the economy. Tony Blair come in and outsourced that to the Bank of England to do that instead. There was all these, the government would be able to legislate, the government would be able to look after certain things, and as a result, the parliamentarians, the MPs of the time, were your representatives in Westminster, and they would have power over certain things. Now, one of the things that, of course, Tony Blair did do was create quangos, and you hear that word quango, a lot of people don't know what that stands for. Quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisations. So he outsourced a lot of the things of government to these organisations that are not accountable to anyone, not part of the government. And so as a result, what happened? You found that when you had to get anything done or try to get anything done, as time went on, you found that you were dealing with more faceless bureaucracies or even faceless corporations, unreachable entities that you could not really deal with, and the system itself became more distant from you, and there were no individuals that you could talk to, and the government had basically surrendered the power to do anything, because all these things are now in the hands of this horrible thing that got known, that became what we now call the blob. And so, as a result of that, government is useless. Democracy is pretty much redundant. There is no purpose to any of it. And the UK has been changed beyond recognition. Certain things like the Human Rights Act, which don't look after the human rights of you, the Equalities Act, which deals with those, how can I say, minority people who are more equal than you in this animal farm world that has been created. And also, one of the things that he did bring in that had never been done, at least or at least probably not in a very long time, but certainly not in my lifetime, was the introduction of something where an order could be put against you for doing something that wasn't a crime. And you could end up going to prison for breaking an order for something that you did that didn't start out being a crime. And that thing was, of course, the ASBO, the Antisocial Behaviour Order. Remember them? Yeah? So I think there was a story that I read once of some woman who, she was a little bit loud when she was having How's Your Father with her husband or her boyfriend or whatever, right? And she was living in what we call social housing, which, are deliberately designed so you can hear all your neighbours, unlike private housing, which isn't. And so as a result, when they were having a bit of shenanigans, right, the neighbour heard and complained and said, my neighbour, I can hear her having shenanigans. She don't shut up, she's so loud. And so as a result, she was given an ASBO. Next time she was having an Algie father, she was basically arrested. I think she might have been banged up for it. So the funny thing about it, though, of course, being as the English working classes just find everything funny, and very good when it comes to things like satire and undermining the sort of seriousness and self-importance and hubris that governments like to dish out and like to remind us how important they are. Well, it just so turned out that on your average council estate, where the previous generation of Staffy Bull Terriers and Jack Russells used to be called Rizzler, well, their next children, the puppies of the next generation, all got to be called Asbo. So you had plenty of dogs called Asbo on council estates, which is quite funny when you think about it. Now, of course, not only that, but where the middle classes have to go and get BSc, PhD letters after their names. Well, BSc, PhD, as you all know, stands for bullshit, carefully piled higher and deeper. Well, the working classes wanted to get some honours as well, so the letters A, S, B, O after their name were like marks of distinction, you see. So there's that kind of rustic working class, see the funny side of everything, take the piss thing that the middle classes hate. The control freaks that run the system at the moment, these new post-revolutionary elites that exist at the moment, absolutely despise it. They wish they could control those horrible, savage, uncouth, working class people. How dare they behave like that? They're not socially correct like we are, they say to you, right? And so what happened was that the face of politics changed. It all had to become a little bit more corporate and media friendly, didn't it? So apart from having a couple of exceptions here and there, after Tony Blair, you had Gordon Brown, who was not really, his face didn't really fit that. But immediately after Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and his, we call it small tenure as Prime Minister. Is that the wrong word, tenure? Probably is. Oh, well, But anyway, after him came David Cameron. And I do remember this Private Eye front cover at that time. So I'll just quickly show you this. In case you're wondering about the context of it, there was a news report about the face change operation. And so Private Eye, when they used to be funny, before they became regime comedy like they are now, regime satire, there's an oxymoron for you, eh? But yeah, they decided that they were going to take the piss out of the whole face change operation thing by saying, look, successful face change operation, turn Tony Blair into David Cameron. So then David Cameron, who has that sort of face that looks like he's been holding his farts in for a while, and him and, George Osborne, his next door neighbour at the time, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, also looks like he's been holding his farts in. There are a couple of really, constipated looking Etonian chaps, chaps, who, despite put them in any era, they would always have the faces of aristocrats in powdered wigs, had just enough of that corporate blandness about them, right? And then when, of course, the Tories, I think they got re-elected as a coalition government with the then leader of the Lib Dems as Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, another one of these very corporate, bland types, became Deputy Prime Minister, and then, that's how it kind of went. And while time went on in the future, you had Theresa May, who was very dull, bit John Major-ish in drag, if you ask me. But then when Rishi Sunak come along, the first, I've skipped Boris here, the albino beached whale, because he was a bit of a character. But then after him, you then had Rishi Sunak, who, although he was basically Britain's first diversity Prime Minister, if you closed his eyes, he sounded just like Tony Blair. Well, yes, he had this type of voice that you normally associate with British Prime Ministers these days. That type of voice. I think Ed Miliband sounds like that as well, doesn't he? Yeah, right. And then, of course, you reach the crescendo that you have now, where you have everything possible, really. These Blair clones, they lose a bit of quality. Blair, despite being the kind of somewhat malevolent entity that he is, and he is a malevolent entity, he is nevertheless a very intelligent and very charismatic malevolent person, you know. But as time went on, these corporate Blair clone types that have just come one after another, after another, after another in this post-revolutionary corporate faceless Britain, you end up with the blandest and greyest and dullest, but at the same time sort of evil type, the least charismatic of all. He's kind of got the dullness of John Major. He's got that kind of corporate blandness of Tony Blair. He's got no personality. He's got no charisma, but he just fits that sort of job where he does he basically does the bidding of the puppet masters. Keir Starmer, the algorithmic Prime Minister, doesn't think about what he says, just takes advice, contradicts himself all the time. When he then finds out that something that he said in his endeavours to be an opportunist weren't what he said, he blames it on not reading the script before he spoke, sort of thing, you know. So the algorithmic robot NPC Prime Minister that Britain has at the moment, who doesn't dream, doesn't have a favourite book, doesn't have a favourite poem, doesn't have any sense of the arts, doesn't have a soul, doesn't have anything like that, is kind of perfect for this kind of regime that Britain has at the moment. So, you know, and he's a little bit sort of North Korean, isn't he, in his way? In fact, here's a picture of him, Kim Jong-un. Yeah. There you go. Right. Anyway, so Britain's going through a bit of a state at the moment, and they want to make it illegal for you to even talk about it. I think Angela Rayner, as you know, there's a lot of talk about her wanting to bring in a new rule that will make it illegal to criticise Islam in the UK, illegal to say anything about it, to the point where if there was another, heaven forbid, a thing as bad, if not a hell of a lot worse than what happened at the Ariana Grande concert, or, you know, 7/7, say, for instance, and we knew who it was who did it, we wouldn't be able to criticise the people for their fundamentalist beliefs that led them to do that. Basically, everyone would have to turn into a political prisoner. This is how bad things have got. And so, as a result, freedom of speech being dead now in the UK, but it is very interesting to see this year in 2025 how the protests have gone compared to the optics of how they were in 2024. As I mentioned in the last video, the Battle of Southport, which you would call it, where people got so angry that they were violent and a lot of protests happened that turned into riots, and Keir Starmer just got straight on and "You've got to face the full force of the law," he said, and all of that. And was it Mark Rowley? "We're coming for you everywhere you are in the world, coming for all you Americans," and all of that, right? And Ofcom now, as the UK's internet is now on child settings, are now threatening American businesses with rather hostile results. Yeah, remember 1776. Got to remind them sometimes that they ain't the empire they used to be. So it's interesting to see that as we get to what I will call this year, 2025, and post the Battle of Epping, that the optics of the protests have been much better. Despite there being a few teething problems and, you know, there being one riot, the protests have grown bigger outside all of the migrant hotels, and the rioting has been kept to a minimum. The optics of the protests have been very well managed, and the grassroots working class people of England have done a very good job of getting their internet media optics to be bang on this time. And the one thing this week that actually made me laugh, and I just thought was a really good thing, right, was how people started putting up England flags. Now, of course, I've had mixed feelings, ambivalent feelings about that George Cross being about because of my Irish background. But at a time like this, when the Irish and the English in Northern Ireland have been marching side by side with the tricolour and the Union Jack, the conflicts of the Troubles being brought to an end by the two tribes who spent decades fighting each other, joining each other side by side against a new external force and, should we say, an enemy within government that has basically started threatening the very fabric of Britain and Ireland the way they are these days. I won't go into the specifics of it, but you don't need much of an imagination to know what I'm talking about. I think it's a good thing that people are actually putting these flags up everywhere. Now, the Union Jack is a flag of empire, right? So anyone can claim to be British. I can claim to be British myself, you know, even though I'm from an Irish background, born in England, of foreign parents. Someone from Africa can claim to be British. Someone from any of the old British colonies, India or whatever, can claim to be British. But it is true, to be fair to them, that the English are a culture, they are an ethnicity of their own, and it's unfair that they are all, especially like the working classes, being accused of being far right, when you actually think of what country was more instrumental in actually defeating the Nazis, right? The English and the Americans were instrumental more than any other nation out there, more than any other cultures out there, defeating the actual real fascists during the Second World War, and are the two countries who are being accused the most of being far right for flying their own flags, which used to stand against the swastika. It doesn't make any sense. It's just complete, you know, inside out arse about face world, isn't it? Think, how the hell did that happen? Doesn't make any sense at all. And it's just some kind of an attempt at some mind trick or psyop, isn't it? But it's been really interesting to see how in recent weeks it started in Birmingham, people putting up English flags, and then of course the council saying that they needed to take them down for health and safety reasons because they were dangerous or whatever. Well, it's funny that, that all of a sudden it's like COVID logic. You know how COVID logic worked? That viruses were, they will come and get you if you're drinking in a pub. But if you ate a Scotch egg with your pint, the viruses wouldn't come after you. If you wore a mask some of the time, the viruses wouldn't come out after you. If you sat down in a restaurant and took your mask off, the viruses wouldn't come after you when you were eating, but as soon as you stopped eating, they'd come after you, all that sort of stuff. Well, that dangerous flag, the George Cross that's up there that needed to be brought down because of health and safety rules, well, all you have to do is just to stick a little red triangle and, a few, is it black, white and green stripes, whatever, make it look like a Palestine flag and, hey presto, it's safe now, isn't it? Magic, that. So, it must be that red cross that makes it dangerous, So they were taking them down and people would put them straight back up. And then, of course, I think there was a bloke going around on the mini roundabouts. Now, for foreigners who aren't in England, Americans especially, we have roundabouts rather than intersections. We have narrow roads where a few narrow roads meet. So instead of having a big roundabout, they usually put a small circle in the middle as a mini roundabout. It's a white circle. Someone went and painted red on it, turned it into a George Cross, therefore turning the mini roundabout into an England flag, and they were doing this everywhere. There was even memes about this because people were saying that Birmingham City Council is bankrupt, won't collect your rubbish. There's rubbish bags everywhere, rats everywhere. They won't collect the bags. They're letting the whole city go to shit. But as soon as you put England flags up and as soon as you start painting red crosses on mini roundabouts, they suddenly appear very quickly and are able to deal with that, you see. but they're not Palestine flags, incidentally. So people were saying that, well, look at all the broken roads, look at all the potholes in the roads. So there was a meme where people were filling the potholes with red and white paint to make them look like England flags. And people were even suggesting that they should use dustbin bags with England flags on them, because maybe they'll clear the rubbish up faster and fill the potholes in faster, just purely, specifically to remove the England flags because they're far right, you know, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, I think there was even some sheep that were painted with England flags, and I just love it. This new counter-revolution that appears to be appearing in England as a means of being able to, you know, counter the, you know, how can I say, the agenda that seems to be going on at the moment, is done in good fun. It's done politely, it's done with humour, and it's pretty much unstoppable at this point. And the optics of the protests have been really good, because the people have been really good so far at not allowing them to become violent. You know, the what you call the pink ladies who've turned up at the protests have been very good to make sure that the protests have good optics for the media. And what's this done with the mainstream, with BBC and the likes? They're still calling everyone far right, but they're looking more and more stupid at the moment now. No one wants to believe them. Now, of course, there was a point in the past when the Soviet Union was about to fall. The news that was on the Soviet news was called Vremya. And here's some of the old opening titles for you. I thought I'd show you that. The reason why, of course, being is that in the because no one believed the news anymore, apparently, according to an Adam Curtis documentary that I saw, they would refer to the news hour as the dog hour, because everyone would go out and walk their dogs when the news was on, because no one believed the news, because they all knew it was propaganda, and they called it the dog hour. Britain is getting to the point now where so many people are standing up and rebelling against what's going on, and with the ubiquity of these flags going everywhere, and what there being, you know, hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of people supporting this, there are not millions of far-right people in the UK. And no one can say that there is. It looks ridiculous to call all of these people far-right. It's just basically a bunch of stupid, moron, middle-class people who live in their gated communities, who don't associate with any real people, who don't actually see what's going on, who are not suffering from the problems that are going on in the UK with their government policy and all of that, who only talk to each other and only read The Guardian, who are indoctrinated into some terrible Marxist academia which has basically taken over their minds, who don't see reality, who haven't got a clue what's going on, who are calling everyone far right now. But what are you to say, that the majority of people in the UK are now far right? Are you then to say that you don't want to see the England flag anymore, the flag of the country that you're in, and don't want to see the national flag of the UK anymore, the larger territory that you're in, but yet you want to live there? What are you doing living in such a fascist hellhole? Shouldn't you move to France or Germany or some of those EU countries that you love so much? Why would you live in vulgar, rustic Britain if you love the sophisticated, metropolitan, elite, debonair nature of the continent? I mean, I'd quite happily get all these middle-class twats that live in England. You know, if you're talking about deporting people, I mean, you know, you could put aside for 1 second the new boat people and hotel people. I would quite happily get all of the middle-class twats in England and deport them to the continent of Europe and swap them for a bunch of Eurosceptic, Dutch, Hungarian, Polish, German, French people, come and replace them. They could all come to England and, you know, they could be like the equivalent of the new Huguenots. Now, there's a bunch of immigrants we'd quite happily like, I'm sure, without any problems whatsoever. Hey, how about that? Just have 100% Eurosceptic Brits with 100% Eurosceptic Dutch, Germans, Poles, French, blah, blah, all in the UK, and we can be one big, happy Eurosceptic island. right? That'd be a good way to start. I think that would be a good thing to do, right? And then all the Guardianistas and all of those people, they can just learn French, can't they? You know, go, you know, sip their cafe what's-its in some cafe in France, and they can all out-bourgeois each other there. I mean, why not? Right, where was I at? I'm sorry, I'm rambling so much. I should call this one a ramble cast, I think, but it's like that today. I'm just in a bit of a cheeky, piss-takey mood. Right, so getting to the end of this, there is something that I wanted to point out, and this is David Cameron. David Cameron, 10 years ago, right, I want to play this because this is a little reminder. It's been a while since you've seen this video, and I'm going to put a little bit of a Red Dwarf punchline at the end of it, just, you know, how do I say, to lighten it up a bit. So check this out, see you at the other end.
To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism. We need to argue that prophecies of a global war of religion, pitting Muslims against the rest of the world, these things are nonsense. We need Muslims and their governments around the world to reclaim their religion from these sick terrorists, as so many are doing and quite rightly doing today. We all need help, and to help them with programs that channel young people away from these poisonous ideologues. And we need the strongest possible international focus on tackling this ideology, which is why here at the United Nations, the United Kingdom is calling for a new special representative on extremism.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm convinced.
A little bit Red Dwarf at the end, bit of a punchline that completely kills what he had to say. But yes, one of the things I noticed about David Cameron was the way he was twisting everything. He was, you know, conflating conspiracy theories with Islamic fundamentalists and with fascists. And although he was saying we don't allow, was it Ku Klux Klansmen outside the, outside the colleges and universities and stuff like that, well, they seem to allow radical Marxists. Have you noticed that? They seem to allow them. They're quite happy with people being on the far and extreme end of the other side of politics who are equally as bad, you know, so he failed to mention that. But I thought it was just so brilliant the way he used that intellectual dishonesty to, you know, thread together a narrative which then led into how they were then going to take freedom of speech away. And that was pretty much one of the early nails in the coffin there, wasn't it, you know? Where they then, you know, decided that because there's conspiracy theories around, and you notice the way he hinted that 9/11, he said, was, people were saying it was a Jewish plot. Now, of course, for me, 9/11 is a very murky thing. I'm not sure how I think about it. I don't want to go into that at the moment. I no longer believe the usual 9/11 was an inside job narrative that I used to believe, because I believe that's a containment narrative. And I probably will get more into that in another video if anyone's interested in that. I also don't believe the official story either, but I don't believe the conspiracy narrative. I have my own unique bespoke take on it, but it's so vague and murky I wouldn't even know where to go into it. But at the same time, there were a lot of rather ridiculous and implausible theories that were going out, from the no planes one, which is ridiculous. But then, you know, people going around and saying that all the Jewish people who worked in the buildings were told not to come into work. Now, I mean, that's just very implausible. I didn't believe it. I just thought that was deliberate misinformation that was thrown in to that to discredit the 9/11 Truth movement. I mean, there may have been a lot of elements of the 9/11 Truth movement that were on the money, but they throw that in. And then, of course, he singled that one out to say that it was, that everyone was saying it was a Jewish plot. I never believed that for 1 minute, right? I'm going to make that clear. But it's the way they were talking about conspiracy theories. It was the way they were he was trying to thread that to say that this was extremists and that somehow these people connected to you know, I don't know, Islamists or whatever. And, you know, the way he talked about that was very clever. You know, these Etonians are very good at creating intellectually dishonest narratives with using their knowledge of how other people won't have knowledge of logical fallacies, sophistry, intellectual dishonesty, etc., blah, blah, blah. Right, they're very good at that. And so, as a result, that was one of the things that led us to where we are now, where now there's censorship left, right and centre. They don't want us to talk about anything. So they want to make it illegal for us to talk about things. They want to build a digital panopticon around us and take freedom of speech away from us at every possible opportunity. And what's going to happen? Life is going to get so unbearable in the UK, and enough people are going to rise up against this. And a lot of people now, internet savvy people, know how to come across in a way that's non-violent, in a way that has good optics and in a way that has good PR, that it is going to cause a schism even within the MPs, even with people within Parliament and even with people who exist within the system. There are already police now who are too demoralised to want to do their jobs anymore. There are already MPs in there who don't want to be part of this. And enough people who have been brave enough from the very outset are now bringing about this, what you would call it, knock-on effect, I suppose, where more and more people are going to become brave, more and more people are going to speak out. Now remember, and I said this in the last video, that Václav Havel, who was the first president of the post-Cold War Czech Republic, who was the last important high-profile political dissident of the previous regime, who was always locked up for writing the satirical poetry about the government that he wrote, right, was championed by BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and the government at the time when it was favourable and politically expedient for us in the West to, you know, to basically downplay the East as the Cold War ended, as the Iron Curtain came down, as the Berlin Wall collapsed, right? But these are the very self-same people that would say, no, you're not allowed to be a modern-day Václav Havel now, because if you do, you're an extremist. You're a Tommy Robinson, say, for instance, or you're a terrorist, you're a right-wing extremist, because this is what they would say. And, you know, like I say, I'm coming from a place where, you know, underneath this rather silly, humorous, satirical way that I am explaining everything, in my mind it's above left and right, it's politically agnostic, politically homeless, big picture, zoom out, look at it all. That's where I'm coming from it. And that's where I think everyone needs to be. The whole left and right thing is a whole divide and rule thing. The British Empire were very good at doing that. Yeah, red ants and black ants in the jar, someone shaking the jar. Who's shaking the jar? That's who we should be looking at. As I say, people in the establishment who, you know, who are quite high up, there are a lot of them who are now questioning things. There's the old MP, there's the old politician and high up party member who are now questioning this. There's a lot of police who are questioning this. There's plenty of people in the armed forces that are now questioning this, right? There are people in the middle classes who are questioning this. There's even lefties now who are questioning, especially since the Online Safety Act came in. So we have to look beyond the divides that they have given us and stop being so tribal when it comes to this. And, you know, say, find whatever common ground. If it needs to be that at some point in the future, when we've reclaimed enough of our freedoms again, that we have to reopen our old wounds and fight each other then, well, maybe. But as Aragorn would say, but it is not this day. Right, I've been waffling and droning on for so long. God, how long has this been going on for? Over half an hour? Hope you're still with us and not with the Woolwich. Hey, right, I shall leave it till next time. See you later, alligator. See you soon, baboon.